Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and what you don't know is that I used to bike to work when I lived in Seattle. And not only that, I would go biking on the weekends down the Snohomish River area. And once upon a time, I even bicycled 100 miles up to Bellingham, which, for those of you who don't know the area, Seattle is sort of in the north middle of the state. Then Bellingham is almost on the Canadian border. And I bicycled up there, and then a few days later, I bicycled home. And I had this moment where I was on my bike, and it's a hilly area up in the Skagit River Valley in that area. And I was looking over these hills and I was thinking, my goodness, by the end of the day, I'm going to be beyond the farthest hill I can see. And then from there, I went bicycling, and it was early morning because there's this one place on Chuckanut Bay Drive. And if you've ever been this area, it's this beautiful road going right by Chuckanut Bay on the right, but there's no shoulder at all. And I figured if I get up really early morning, I will be set. So I bicycled through there, did not get run off the road, and bicycled all day to get back down to Seattle. That was my first. It ended up being a 104-mile day. And I got to tell you, by the end of that, I was both wrecked physically because I wasn't in shape, but I also had this feeling of, wow, I traveled all this distance, and I had this level of power and this energy and this pride that came from, wow, I can do more than I think that I can do. And wow, I can travel a long distance. And it just filled me with such joy. And even now, so many years later, I look back and go, wow, I did that. We have on our podcast today a guy who has also done that and helps other people do that and add energy to their lives through cycling. We have Anthony Walsh from Roadman Cycling to go and walk us through what is it that cycling does that adds this energy to our lives, that goes and makes everything better. Anthony, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Brian, thank you for having me.
It is an utter delight to be talking to a serious cyclist, as I was a serious casual cyclist. Like, I biked to work for a few months. I did 1 century, but I never made that leap to this is who I am.
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about cycling. It can be many different things to many different people. And even for me, when I look back at my relationship with the bike, like when I was a child, the bike, it's your method for breaking free. You know, your mom always says to you, don't go past the end of the street. And then all of a sudden you get a bike, and now you're allowed to explore the next community or the next neighborhood over. So for me as a child, it allowed me explore neighborhoods and expand my horizons. And then when I got into college, my background, I spent 7 years qualifying as a lawyer. And I don't think I would have lasted that long going through university if I had to be stuck in rush hour traffic to and from university every day. The bike was a mode of transport for me. It was something different. It allowed me to, abscond from that just routine of stuck in traffic all day. And I had a peace of mind and a clarity when I got to college. And then after university, I had a chance to ride my bike professionally. So the bike became a tool for me to earn a living. And now post my professional cycling career, and I'm podcasting on the Roadman Cycling podcast. And I've since discovered that I went on a journey, which we'll get into in a little bit, where I built a bunch of businesses, and I found that, my bank account's getting bigger, but as my bank account's getting bigger, my happiness level's almost going down. And it was then that I went back and rediscovered cycling again and used it as a tool to recapture, as the tagline for my podcast is, cycling as a tool to recapture your health, happiness, and longevity. So it's just so many different things to so many different people, and it can be so many different things to the same person at different periods of your life also.
You got me thinking about, you brought me back as you're talking about commuting to school. And when I was biking to work, it was Bike to Work Month, which I think was February that year. This was back when I was a night security guard, in case that's not glamorous enough for you. And I'd bike to work to put on a fake cop uniform. No, excuse me, that was actually later. No, I was first a night security guard. I was biking to work when I was a daytime dispatcher. So my day was spent on the radio managing the security team for a transit agency. So again, wearing a fake cop uniform on the radio, okay, managing train stations and such like. And I would bike to work. And there was this one day where I had a weekend day. So it was a 12-hour shift on the weekend, but someone called out. So, and I was hoping I'd just go in 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Instead, I'd go 6 a.m. to to midnight, or to 2 p.m. or to 2 a.m. But then they said, no, we need you to come in at 2 a.m. Start your shift 4 hours earlier. And I thought, oh man. So I got up and I got on my bike at something like 1 a.m., about a half hour ride to get to work. Got to get cleaned up so I can be at work at 2 a.m. And I remember biking along, and it was cold out, cold out. And I remember all these people being out and about. And I thought, wow, these folks are really getting up early, until I realized, oh, no, wait, it's Friday night for them. They're out drinking and partying. I'm biking to work in the cold, freezing my butt off at 1 a.m. But that experience, it gave this bookend to my job, which was not the most fun job in the world. It was a bit stressful, actually. And but that bookend of cycling and moving, and I was only commuting 10 miles, it wasn't that far, but that distance, it created this, I don't know, the space for joy, that even if it was a crappy day at work, and even if I was exhausted biking home, I still had this space to go, and I don't know, it's something about interacting with the natural environment in a way that when I'm in a car driving somewhere, it's just totally different.
But like Brian, the way we live at the moment, we're not designed for that. If you look at how long
Yeah.
humans have existed and the massive rapid evolution of technology in the last, decade, especially really post-industrial revolution, but especially the last decade and the kind of Zoom generation now, we
Hmm.
move so little. We
Yeah.
experience so little adversity in terms of hot temperatures, cold temperatures, doing difficult things. Cycling is such a nice way to reconnect with ancestrally how our body wants to live. It wants to move. It wants to be exposed to extremes of temperature. We're designed for that. We're not designed for Zoom culture, inactivity, you know, excess calories all day long, no access to sunlight. And that's
Hmm.
manifesting itself in some pretty dire health consequences in terms of the number of people who are addicted to antidepressants, unhappiness levels are all time high, obesity level is all time high.
Hmm.
We're maladapted for the environment we're in at the moment.
For people who hear all that and they think, that sounds like me, but they haven't bicycled since they were a teenager, and maybe they're not sure about how to get started because where they live, there's no easy bike trails around. What is the first step, Anthony, where people say, okay, maybe I should try out cycling? What's the first step look like for an adult who's just not in the habit?
Well, I think the first step is understanding. I always say start with your why. And it's an easier ask because if we look at exercise regimes or diets, they don't last because
Hmm.
willpower doesn't last. Willpower is finite. If you have to motivate yourself to get out the door every single day. But if you look at, the last 2 years has been difficult for everybody, no matter what part of the world you live. And the pandemic
Uh-huh.
has been such an eye opener for people that I see this as like a great awakening for people because it's become obvious that, I know the vaccine debate was huge over here and it was pretty much split down the middle on either side. And even without getting into the merits of that, most people on either side wanted to do what they thought was best for their health. But the
Yeah.
pandemic and that whole debate, it highlighted that health isn't a tablet, it's not an injection, it's a 365-day a year obligation. And there will come something, whether it's, pandemics or whether it's obesity, that's slowly going to take away your health. And the old saying is like, I think it was Mark Twain that said, health is the invisible crown that you wear on your head that only the sick people can see.
Mm.
So we need to prioritize that health. And cycling is just such an easy, simple way to get us moving again. And the beautiful thing is, you can get started so inexpensively. There doesn't have to be these monetary barriers that you need $1,000 or a $5,000 bike. You literally get started with your bust up bike you have in your garage. And if you're doing nothing today, you cycle around the block 10
Hmm.
minutes because all we need in life to be happy is progress. No matter how lean you are, no matter how ripped you are, it doesn't really matter because the only person you're competing against is you from yesterday. If you're 20 pounds overweight last week, but you're 19 pounds overweight this week, you know what? You've made progress and you're going to be happy as hell this week.
I'm competing with my couch and with Netflix, I'll have you know. That's what I'm competing with.
But Brian, this is the scary stuff. Like I heard the Netflix CEO speaking on CNBC's Fast Money, and they
Uh-huh.
asked him who his biggest competitor was at the
Yeah.
moment. And he said sleep.
Yep.
Like seriously, think about like how, if you've read any of Matt Walker stuff, he's a brilliant podcast, an amazing British author who has the book Why We Sleep. And sleep is just so fundamental to everything we do as humans, from staving off stuff like Alzheimer's, dementia, obesity, mental health problems. And to think that Netflix is chipping away at something so fundamental to us as our sleep. and that this is socially acceptable. And, these binge-worthy series, like, it's a total marketing masterclass these sort of companies have pulled off. And they're slowly eroding our health and our happiness. And we need to put up barriers to take that back.
Yeah, I'm just buying that book you just mentioned right now, Why We Sleep, because I look at that and I think I have a lot going for me. I've done a lot of cool things, pretty healthy, but I use this thing called the Aura Ring. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I wear it as well, actually.
Fantastic. So for folks who aren't familiar, it tracks your sleep at night, it tracks your activity during the day, your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, all this good stuff. And from this, I've discovered that I get very little deep sleep. If I get half an hour in a night, that's unusually good for me. Which 9 minutes or 2 minutes is a bad night. Which for folks who are not literate in sleep culture, that's horrible. It means that I'm a walking zombie all the time. And so as I've looked at, well, what can I possibly do to increase my deep sleep? One of the obvious ones is up how much I move from whatever it is between, a 0 to an hour and a half a day. If I moved that up to more like an hour to 3 hours a day, that's probably combined with, food, light, drinking, water, everything else, probably one of the easiest ways I could non-pharmaceutically increase how much sleep I'm getting. Do you find a difference in how well you sleep, Anthony, between your good training days and your rest days?
For sure. So behind the Roadman Cycling podcast is a coaching company, and that's actually how the podcast came about. So we work with athletes, or increasingly it's a lot of corporate people who are looking to recapture their health, and they're looking to recapture their health and use cycling as that vehicle. Some of the stuff that you need to be looking at to optimize that sleep, yes, it's activity level during the day, but you don't have to carve out more time for this, Brian. It's looking at your commute and going, well, can I get off the bus 2 stops earlier and walk? Can I bike to work instead of driving? Where can you use dead time? Can you make your phone calls while you're walking around the block? We should be looking to move all day, and 10,000 is that sort of baseline activity level for movement. And then we start layering in stuff like cycling. But evening routine is super important. You need to be looking at that window almost 3.5 to 4 hours before you go to bed, and starting to think, okay, well, how did we live ancestrally? So for the entirety of human existence, the sun has started to go down. And as the sun started going down, we could see the sun starting to go down, and our body would start to release our hormones that would make us fall asleep. So it would release our melatonin, which would help us go asleep. And then the next morning, inversely, melatonin would drop and serotonin would rise as the sun rose. But what's happened now is once we start getting that hormonal release, and our body's like, okay, it's nighttime, so I need to start ramping up to go to sleep hormones. What happens? We flick on an iPad, we flick on a phone, we flick on a TV, and our body's like, oh, it's daytime again. So let's ramp down the hormone to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally messing up our circadian rhythm. So a simple thing you can use is like a brand like RA Optics and a simple blue light blockers to block out that light after sort of 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. And staying away from caffeinated beverages, starting to light the house a little bit more ancestrally, turning off big LED lights and starting to use more candle lights and things like this, getting away from screens and stimulation, starting to read and just slow the body clock down. And the really cool thing about this, if you're wearing, like you are, an Oura ring, you can see in the data that this is actually making a difference.
Yeah, it's we use salt lamps around our house. And then we
Amazing.
also I have Flux on my computer. So if I am on a screen, I have it set to full red. So there's no blue light leaving my screen by the time the sun's gone down.
It's a great strategy.
And so I do sometimes watch TV later than I should, to within an hour of bed, which I know is not ideal. But we make sure like the overhead lights are turned off, and we do a whole bunch of those things. Tell me more about this coaching thing you do at Roadman Cycling, because you're talking about all this sleep stuff, which is not what I would expect from someone who says, I'm a cycling coach. So what's the full coaching thing you're talking about?
So I suppose my journey, I went from, I was quite a promising cyclist through law school, qualified as a lawyer. And then I went off and I was a professional cyclist for 5 years. And I came home, and then I'm giving you the real sort of Cliff Notes version. I came home, and over the course of 5 years, I built a bunch of businesses, sold some of them, wrapped some of them up. And at one point, I remember I was coming back from a bike race. I was overweight. I was basically unhappy at the time, although I hadn't checked in with myself to, label it as unhappy or depressed. And I remember coming home and just thinking, you know what? I don't ever remember being this unhappy because I've always been a super happy person. And I chatted to a friend of mine who mentors me in business, and he said, look, it's like a computer game here. You've gone the wrong direction. You've made a strategic wrong move. So I was like, okay, well, what do I do? And he was like, well, go a different direction.
Hmm.
And over the course of 1 week, I sold or wrapped up or liquidated 5 businesses. And I literally
Whoa.
stood still and spent 2 years where I said, okay, well, what is my next move? And I went all around the world, took 2 years out and just literally stood still. And then I came back and I said, I'm going to focus completely on answering one question. How do I use cycling as a tool for health, happiness, and longevity? And
Hmm.
initially, I was trying to answer this question for myself because I knew cycling made me happy and I knew it had the power to, have this domino effect into all areas of my life. So I started cycling, but also with a combination of biohacks, specific strength and conditioning protocols, nutrition protocols. And I put together this kind of 5-point system. And I went through this myself and I got back into really good shape, qualified for the world championships back at elite level in cycling within a very short period of time. And I was like, this is interesting because I've never got into this sort of shape of so little on the bike time. Normally, back in the day when you're professional, you're riding the bike 35 hours a week. But here I was like 10 hours a week, 8 hours a week, and I was in professional level shape.
Hmm.
So I had a big moment then. A friend of mine who was a former athlete but had put on like a lot of weight, like I'm talking 50 kilograms, like that's over 100 pounds. He was smoking, he was drinking,
Hmm.
he was sort of a weekend drug user. He was living basically a very, very unhealthy life. And he came to me and he's like, I'm in a bad spot. He's like, I've spent too long chasing career and prioritizing the wrong stuff. I need to get my health back now. Like I can feel like I'm mid-40s. I can feel like what's on the far side of me not looking after my health or going the direction I'm going, it's bad news. And I don't want to go there. And he's like, all the stuff you done to get back in shape to get to the world championships,
Haha.
can you do that with me? And I was like,
Uh-huh.
no way. I'm not doing that with you. I was like, no way. So he literally begged me, like he'd knocking on my door like every day, going, come on, come on, come
Wow.
on. I'm committed. I'm committed. And I was like, okay. And previously I had a coaching company, but I was really working with coaching like 18-year-old kids who wanted to go pro. So this was the first time I'd ever taken a guy in his mid-40s, overweight, all the bad lifestyle habits you can imagine as he was trying to chase a corporate career. And so I eventually succumbed to his pressure and I went and I built this routine for him with some cycling, strength and conditioning, but specific biohacks like sauna exposure, cold therapy, meditation, diary, gratitude, a lot of evening routines.
Wow.
And we went 6 months at this and the effects were unreal. We went another 6 months and I think fast forward a total 12 months, he'd end up losing like 48 kilograms of body weight.
Whoa.
His power on the bike was insane. Like he ended up, you probably won't understand. Some of your listeners might. We work on watts. He added like almost 200 watts onto his threshold power, which is like Lance Armstrong would have doped and taken EPO to add like 40 watts onto threshold. So this is like 5 times that benefit. But
Wow.
for me, what the kicker was, it was actually chatting to him on a human level, and he's like, I'm back having sex with my girlfriend, and I haven't had sex like properly, honestly, in 4 years. And he's
Whoa.
like, I have the confidence to speak up in work and I'm after getting a promotion. It changed his whole life. And at that point, I was like, holy shit. And I felt like almost a calling. I was like,
Wow.
okay, well, this is my mission now. I'm going to share this system with the world. I'm going to tell everyone about this. And that's how the podcast came about. That's the genesis of the podcast. And since then, I've taken this sort of 5-step system, which is it's cycling, it's nutrition, it's strength and conditioning, it's biohacking, and it's mindset. Taking these 5 elements and using them for people, guys and girls, who have spent too long going down the wrong road, trying to chase career to the neglect of their health. And I'm showing them how to recapture their health. And cycling is the vehicle we're using to do that. But cycling is only one of 5 parts of this system we're using to do that. And it's been, a massively rewarding journey. And it just seems like there's such an appetite for, the podcast is, absolutely exploded, over 100,000 downloads every week on it now, all organic. And it's just because there's so many people seem stuck in the same rut and they're looking to capture that vitality they had when they were in their teens and during their 20s. and they see people just like them who have got it back, and they're like, oh, I want some of that.
Wow. Do you know Dr. Philip Ovedi, the heart surgeon?
I don't know. I will
He's
check
a
him out.
friend of mine. He's a heart surgeon who was 100 pounds overweight as a heart surgeon by doing exactly what he told his clients to do. And then one day he realizes, I'm fat. And he stops, he just basically relearns everything he thinks he knows about metabolic health. He wrote a book called Stay Off My Operating Table, and you would enjoy being on his podcast and the reverse, because he's found the same thing in the States, that there's just so many people, they know they've lost their health, but they don't know why or how to fix it. So
It's a slow erosion is the problem, and
mm,
it's we make small decisions daily that compound and lead us to a bad place. But the good news from that is you're verifying the power of compounding decisions daily. Compounding decisions daily works, in a
yeah,
good way and a bad way.
yeah. Well, we're right on our time here, Anthony. So, real quick, two questions. Do you work with people only in Ireland or anywhere in the world?
No, we're all over the world. We're
All over the
online
world.
based, so we're all over the world.
Wonderful. So roadmancycling.com is the best place for folks to find out more details on your coaching. And what's that podcast name again?
So the podcast is the Roadman Cycling Podcast, and I've actually put together a landing page for your listeners. So if you
Oh,
go to
yeah.
roadmancycling.com/redbeard, I have a 14-day, it's like a members area with 14 days of cycling
Fantastic.
plans to get everyone started, and hydration guides and stretching guides and everything you need to get started. So, it's totally free. We normally sell it, but I wanted to get your listener started on a good footing.
So you're basically taking away all my excuses other than the fact that it's raining for not getting back on my bike,
And
basically.
bikes work indoors too.
Oh, wow, that's harsh. Okay, folks, if you want that kind of harshness, roadmancycling.com/redbeard. Anthony, thank you so much for sharing about how you're using cycling to improve people's health, happiness, and longevity. Folks, go ahead, roadmancycling.com. You can also find Anthony over on Instagram, roadman.cycling. Anthony, thanks for being on the show.
Brian, thank you for having me.